So that's the journey we've spoken about, and we are now embarking on journey 2, the ensoulment. And this emerged because there was an exchange where one person who is very passionate to the young and has been in the education space for many years spoke passionately about the importance of offering support to the young and to youth at this time. And one of the things that emerged was the stress that's engulfing now in some places around the world, the issue of gender dysphoria, confusion, and stress. And I felt that this was one of those moments where we could stay superficial and just acknowledge it, or I could try to demonstrate something. And I felt called to demonstrate not the answer, and to not teach anybody what they need to think, but to offer a pathway of how to inquire into the space. And as I unfolded it, what I attempted to show was that it will be insufficient to try to invoke either a religious point of view or an esoteric point of view, because we live in such a polarized time, and you may communicate something passionately, or you may communicate something that you feel is esoterically sourced. But when you communicate it into the public arena that's highly polarized, whatever you said from a place that's core will likely create some kind of a polarized response. So I asked permission, not to give an answer, but to offer some process, tools, and inquiries by way of demonstrating, again, not what to think, but how to think into this difficult, painful, struggling space. And I began by suggesting to ask, is it effective? Is it effective to just be grounded in one's religious view or esoteric view or humanistic view or any view? Is it effective to just gravitate to that one singular view and passionately express it? Or is there an opportunity to embrace the discomfort of this debate, this struggle? And once we are embracing the discomfort, are we prepared to engage in the conversation, absolving each other from trigger warnings? They're not going to be trigger warnings. We're not going to police each other's thought. We're actually going to practice self-regulation in the way of seeing and witnessing each other, as we bring humility to not think that we have the full answer. And so this entire search started with the idea, with the question of why binary and why polar views or polarity views cannot offer resolution. Because once we are inside that polarity lockdown, we are not in conversation, we're not in exploration, no new ecology, no new pathway, no new absolution, no new relief and redeeming capacity of that block situation, stop situation can find us. So I suggested that we explore the exoteric, the mesoteric, and the esoteric. The exoteric is the public space, public arena, where people often are captured by the polarization of an argument, of a cultural argument, the culture wars. The mesoteric is where we do the extra study, when we process the data, and the esoteric is where we search for the essence view, or the core view, or the first principle view. And I said, so let us please inquire deeply, why is this so culturally polarizing? That's where you want to deeply reflect. And as you do, can you inquire deeply, what is the liberal impulse and what is the conservative or traditional impulse? Can you deeply appreciate them for what they are? Can we see that they both have light and they both have shadow? And if we are going to become redeemers of a stop situation and offer easement and healing, we will do so by metabolizing the shadow and the light of both sides. So for example, we will see that the higher aspect, that the light of the liberal impulse is the live and let live. Is the live and let live of wanting to provide for all lives and for each and every one all that they may need. And that the shadow arises on the extreme liberal left, sometimes called woke left, is when the live and let live takes its authoritative, dictatorial extreme and sees that the highest organizing principle must be to not prevent from anyone any right. And it sees, again, in the right sense, that preventing a right from anyone is an imposition, but then it makes that the insistence that every person, every situation must have any right they imagine. They see that to be the highest organizing principle, not recognizing that if you consecrate that, that becomes an imposition on others. So the recognition that the performative contradiction of the live and let live is that when you take that to the extreme end, you actually become dictatorial and you become imposing on other people. And in the same way, the traditional conservative impulse, where there is an upholding of life and nature and an ordered universe, and the fact that there are two genders and they don't want anyone and anything to mess around with that, and the appreciation that there is a universal order and universal logic, and there is a place for that, and that too needs to find its place in the bigger cosmology of ideas, but that too has a shadow when it becomes an imposition on other situations. So how can we accommodate and metabolize these two impulses in the way they show up in the world and seek to find the deeper, higher sentiment of both? And then, that as we said, if we're going to be serious about this, we need to embrace and do the study work, process the data. What is the information that's available for us about the, for example, environmental pollution factor, how that impacts the well-being of the youth, and how that impacts even some of the hormonal developments and stress that's appearing with youth. And what are the other causes for hormonal stress? And what are the other causes for psychological stress? And why indeed do we see that there used to be a certain percentage in youth that gravitated to that experience of dysphoria, but why has it been doubling over the last decade or two? And where will we map the bigger cosmology of stress, of dysphoria, depression, anxiety? And why is it probably the first time in the history of mankind, at least in the modern history, where we have more than 50% of youth are pessimistic about the future, afraid about their future, filled with anxiety about the world of tomorrow? What does it mean? What does it say? How does that become a factor in the gender exploration, the gender debate, the gender conversation? All that is part of doing the diligent work of being able to enter the space and then still not denying ourselves, not denying your feelings and sentiments, not thinking you have to be perfect, and actually practicing the self-regulation and the space to allow people to bring the voice of fear. What horrifies you? Why? What frightens you? And why? And for you to be able to say, I am horrified by the polarization in the world. I am horrified by the fact that nobody is prepared to listen to anybody, and that there is an ideological capture, that every core issue is debated as a political debate of two sides and becomes a scoring points with virtue signaling to transmit to some constituents your beliefs and position. And that so much of it is grounded in dehumanizing and belittling the other side. And that it's okay to say that you are afraid and scared and horrified by the treatment protocol, the hormonal protocols, and some of the procedures that are more invasive, where youth are allowed to go into a surgical procedure to change their private parts. And it's okay if you feel completely out of the comfort zone in this conversation. That is part of the conversation, including for you to say that openly that what is so horrifying for you that some of the largest medical institutions in the world just found a gold mine, and that behind closed doors they are bragging about the new gold mine that they have found, and that by offering those surgical procedures they are thrilled with the money that it enables them to generate, and how perverse the incentive structure is in the healthcare system, and that becomes just another adding pain into injury into this space. And ultimately that it's okay to say that you are distressed with the confusion, with the suffering of those people that seek transition, and there's so many of them that then seek to detransition, and that you may want to process some of their testimonies. And so all that was part of just doing the mesoteric work, and that then if you wanted, you could bring online some of the more esoteric metaphysical point of views. And I'm going to go through this very quickly to suggest that there are the three lines that we have explored here before, and I brought it into the conversation as a framework to contemplate these possibilities. And again, Jeff, all in line of creating the ecology to wonder how to think about this rather than what to think about this. And the three lines is this framework, and the recognition that we could trace at any time the inquiry of the natural line, which is where we are born. We all show up for life on the natural line. But we enter a world that's been traumatized and been accumulating pain and polarization and distrust, as we said. And we enter the experience of life on the condition line. And because of that, so much of what we see throughout the epochal progression is that there is a new permission that shows up on the evolutionary line of humanity. And on some rare occasions, we are able to respond to it more on the natural line. But more often than not, what we see that the new permission is hijacked on the condition line. And actually, because of that, the work of evolutionary service is to do both the release, the healing work to the condition line, and the evolutionary work on the natural line. So, and I brought that, and I bring this into this equation of how very early in the Homo sapiens journey, we discovered that large coordination and collaboration was coming online as a permission. And as a result of that, some of the ancient early agrarian civilization arose. But as those larger civilizations arose, they also brought subjugation and oppression and slavery and colonization. So a permission that opened up for Homo sapiens and facilitated some of the breakthrough technologies of the agrarian civilizations also brought some unfortunate accumulation on the condition line. And you flow in time and you come to the early universities and the quest for knowledge in the 11th, 12th, 13th centuries, but also ultimately to the 16th century and the Enlightenment. And what's coming online is the objective perception and the third and fourth person perspective. But that is largely taken through the Cartesian fallacy, the Cartesian separation, into the exterior measurement. So we lose the capacity to become integrated in the exterior and the interior. We take the telescope and the microscope to be the only authority of truth and completely leave out and throw the baby with the bathtub water in terms of the human sensitivity. To have people like yourself trying to, in this day and age, redeem the capacity to be sensitized in the integration of oneself as a whole human person. So on the one hand, the release of the scientific revolution and the industrial revolution and all that brought as a result of that is awesome, but the primacy of doubt as the instrument of the Descartesian revolution becomes an imposition on the natural evolution of human life as an integrated whole. And then how that then leads to this idea that we can become more creative and productive in our expression, and that largely is taken through the Industrial Revolution into the extractive, grid-based exploitation. And so this Homo solaris permission that emerged in the 19th century, the permission of which was expressed in the entrepreneurial life and the fact that we were going to move from a aristocratic society to a meritocracy, that permission was, so much of it was consumed into the exploitation of greed. So when we came to the 20th century, and the 20th century brought the early permission of Homo Universalis and invited us to unlock the core powers of life, because that's what it means to become universal in our nature. Guess what we humanity chosen to do? Well, one of the things we've chosen to do was to develop the atomic bomb, because we discovered that we have the capacity to unlock universal power in the most destructive way here on planet Earth. So the highest permission of the Universalis coming online is also appearing in the anti-Universalis, anti-life way, because everything always emerges as a polarity on this planet Earth. And I went through this entire journey to suggest that part of the confusion that's occurring now with gender dysphoria that is expressed so much through the young is an expression of another aspect of universal life, because universal life, could it be, is a space and a permission to redefine who we are. And so that brought me to the invitation of some of the more explorative inquiries, not as an answer to the gender stress and confusion conundrum, but as an invitation to contemplate the possibility of it. So it brought me all the way back to say, so what are the three lines in relation to this conundrum, to the gender confusion, and what is a way to think into what it says to us? Because the inquiry of the three lines suggests, can I see a phenomena in the world and wonder in the flying upside down view, what is the permission that's opening? And alongside the pain and the strife and the anxiety, it is representative of something that's trying to gain entry into human life that is confused, perhaps, through this social strife and struggle. And so the invitation was to think, what is a way to respond on the natural as was meant to be line? And that started to open the consideration that human life, and that is inspired by some of the work in the community, that recognition that you are never just one life. If you are showing up as a male in your gender, you are a male and you are a man, and you are the virtues life and you are the essence life. And if you show up in a body of a female, you are a woman and you are the virtues life and you are the essence life. And what those come to say is that we each have those higher dimensions, and those higher dimensions of ourselves, they're not limited to the sex inside of which we appeared, but that there is still a place to consider what's the universal logic and function of sex and gender. Do they have a function? And if yes, what it is? And what might be then the way to reflect on, could it be that some of the experience that these young people are going through, it requires not necessarily a change of their private parts, but actually a permission to recognize that you can be in one part of yourself the sex that you were born into, and it's completely natural and is part of what is arising at this time, that you can process and become in the psychological, in the identity part of yourself, in the energetic, psychological, behavioral inclinations and formations. You can become genderless, or you can become all the identities that the universe permits you to become, not necessarily in needing to change your physical body, but in embracing the various virtues and essence formations and configurations of a life. And that could it be that that is where perhaps there is a way to sense into bringing easement into this stress. And that inside it, could we embrace the idea that we are a first self in the biological person that we showed up in, and that we are a second self in the inclinations and passions and talents and skills and capabilities that we bring to life, and we are a third self in the permissions that gain access through us, the universal permissions, the universal configurations that gain access through us, and that we in that sense are simply ambassadors and agents for these other realms of possibility that want to work through human life, that can work through us. So could we embrace all that, not as an answer to the pain, not as an answer to the struggle, but as a way of inquiring with a sense of humility and thoroughness and care, not to be the answer that the young person need, because we are not here to try to provide any dogmatic answer, but so that we are sourced in ourselves in the deeper inquiry of the change that is underway for humanity, and how when a new evolutionary permission opens up, it brings on the condition line struggle and pain and crisis in all systems. And this is just one example. And that could we, as ambassadors of the human possibility, could we do the inner work, not teaching or telling them what they need to do or what they need to be, but sourcing ourselves in the broader inquiry to then be able to offer an advisory from that is situationally customized and is sensitive to whoever and whatever the circumstance that we find ourselves in. So that's the ensoulment journey sample of journeying right to the point of struggle and pain, not to try to answer it, but to try to become the pathway of inquiry where answer and solution can be found. Along with our website at portalsofperception.org, Portals is also available on YouTube and on all podcast platforms, as well as social media. You can become an active member and join the conversation in community events. And you can help us get the word out by liking this content and by sharing it with your friends.